Rolling, rolling, rolling. All right, so.
Doggies rolling right. Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Joan Trumpauer Mulholland began campaigning for civil rights in the early 1960s. She actually served some time in jail, and we'll talk about more of that in our next conversation with her son, Emmy-award winning director Loki Mulholland. We'll talk about not only his mom, but why he decided to get involved in civil rights activism. Check out our conversation. Well, let's talk about some of your other films, and let's also talk about how did you get involved in civil rights and that sort of thing.
Well, what's your first question?
Well, let's go with that one. How did you get involved in civil rights first?
How could I not?
A lot of people don't.
A lot of people's mothers aren't Joan Trumpauer Mulholland. They don't have statues of their mothers in museums, and her mugshots, considered one of the most famous in American history.
Now, I'm sure a lot of my listeners probably aren't going to know who your mom is. So tell us a little bit about your mom.
So by the time my mom was 19 years old, she had been involved in about 3 dozen sit-ins and protests when she joined the Freedom Rides and was put on death row. And that's the beginning of her story. But she's kind of the Forrest Gump of civil rights. She was everywhere and knew everyone. From Fannie Lou Hamer to Dr. King, Jackie Robinson. I mean, it's actually I learned more about my mom after I made the film than I did during making the film, because there's new stuff that comes out all the time.
Yeah, so you're talking about An Ordinary Hero.
An Ordinary Hero, yes, I'm sorry, yeah. So a documentary I did about my mother called An Ordinary Hero, which is about her life in the student movement of the civil rights movement. So she when she was 10 years old, she goes to Georgia, where her grandmother lives. The southern grandmother. And every summer they would go there. But when she was about 10 years old, on a dare, they go to her and her friend go to the black quarters. Of course, they had a different name for it then. And she saw the discrepancy in the living situations, but in particular the schoolhouse. So the schoolhouse is that classic, straight out of Hollywood, black one room schoolhouse for black children, right? With no glass in the windows, no paint on the walls, a potbelly stove in the middle for heat, outhouse. This is in stark contrast to the brand new post-World War II brick building that was in this little town for the white students. Now that building is still the nicest building in Oconee, Georgia. It's now just a rest home for, probably for all those students, 70 years ago, right? But so she sees this and she says, this is wrong. I got to do something about it. She actually said it rattled her soul, and because what she was taught in church, my mom's Presbyterian, is that we do unto others you haven't done to you, and you've done the least of these, my brethren, you've done unto me. She says all that good King James stuff, right? And she really took that to heart. She had to memorize the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, and she really believes it. The values of what our country espouses. She said we're just not living up to them. And so when she sees this for herself for the first time, for real, right? We can see things all the time, but it's not, when it finally registers, I guess is the point. And kind of connecting the dots. All of a sudden it became, wow, this is wrong. And she gets her chance. My grandmother decides, when my mom graduates from high school, and she wants to go to a small kind of church school in Ohio, which is where her Sunday school teacher went, which was John Glenn, the astronaut. And my grandmother was just aghast. She was like, "Oh no, what if she has a classmate who's black, or heaven forbid, a roommate who's black, right? I'm going to send her to Duke, right? Which was the worst.
Duke had no black students.
Duke was segregated. It was a safe school, which was the worst place to send her if you wanted to keep her out of the civil rights movement, because just down the road was Greensboro, North Carolina, which is where the first student sit-in took place. The Greensboro 4 on February 1st, 1960. Well, the next sit-in was in Durham, and my mom's invited to join. And as I say, the rest is history.
When there's a famous photo, with her getting.
Well, that was a few years later.
Oh, that was a few years later. Okay.
Yeah, I do have some photos of my mom, but not the sit-in of that particular sit-in.
And was that the Woolworth lunch counter?
Right, that's the Woolworth 1963 Woolworth lunch counter in Jackson, Mississippi.
Oh, wow.
Where they're pouring the stuff on her head, and there's Ann Moody and John Salter and a mob of 200 to 300 people behind them. And, I could probably count on my hands the number of times my mom has said, and that's when I thought we were going to die, right? I mean, find out later she was actually on the Klan's most wanted list, and was actually hunted down for execution. But because they failed, they ended up killing a couple of her friends instead.
Oh.
So, yeah.
That's terrible.
My mom's pretty cool. But so, I mean, it's and I get people who ask me, all the time, would you sit at the lunch counters? Right? I'm like, well, I don't have to. My mother already did. But I have to do what I can do. Right? Because doing nothing's not an option.
So these films are kind of your lunch counter.
The films are my lunch counter. Right? It's my way of continuing that process of healing and of educating and of moving the work forward to help us actually form that more perfect union. And to go back to the principles of who we are as a nation, of who we want to be as a nation. We've gotten better. We honestly have. I mean, good grief. We don't have slavery anymore. We don't have Jim Crow anymore. I mean, we actually had a black president. We have a black vice president. Right? That's progress. Doesn't mean that there's still not that foundation of racism that we still need to work on, and that each of us need to work on. I mean, it's there's something to be said when, President Oaks is saying Black Lives Matter, when the first presidency is very open about race and racism in America, and within the church, and how we should be living as members of the church as well. I mean, you can either take the buffet approach to the gospel and pick what you like and so forth and ignore the rest, or say that, the argument I've always heard is, well, they're just trying to be with the times. I'm like, okay, when has the first presidency ever tried to be with the times? First of all. But second of all,
they fought against polygamy.
Right. But second of all,
segregation.
Aren't they prophets for our time? So, yeah, right. The essays on race and so forth. I think it was a Temple Recommend interview, and the bishop was like, afterwards, like, was there anything I could do for you? I said, yeah. I'm actually kind of curious as to why we haven't talked about, there was the anniversary of the restoration of the priesthood for African Americans, right? And I said, yeah. How come we haven't talked about any of that? How come we haven't talked about the essay the church just came out with on racism? He's like, what are you talking about?
Most bishops don't know about the essays. I think it's getting a little bit better, but
yeah. But it was like, oh, I didn't even thought about that. I'm like, well, yeah. I mean, don't we mourn with those who mourn?
Well, so. I had a conversation.
Is that where you wanted it to go?
No, but I had a conversation, since you talked about Black Lives Matter,
right.
with my bishop, where. And I referenced Elder Oaks' talk about Black Lives Matter, and his response was, but not the group. The group's a Marxist organization. And I'm like, Black Lives Matter. I don't care about the group. Right. How do you respond to people when they say, well, but that group's a Marxist organization? Okay.
Well, first, it's not. I think one of the leaders believes in some of the Marxist ideals. But let me ask you this. So if a member of the Republican Party is a QAnon follower and believes that, Jewish lasers are starting forest fires, does that mean every Republican is a QAnon follower? Right? If I can point to...
We can paint, it's right. Great, because we do that with black organizations. Right. We did it with Martin Luther King, that he was a communist. There's a picture with him sitting next to a communist, which was a staged photo that people don't understand still,
right.
And the John Birch Society still loves to promote.
Yeah, sure.
And so it's easy to paint Black Lives Matter as a
right.
It's just the same old thing.
Mitt Romney sits with Democrats. Does that make him a Democrat? I mean, come on.
Well, some people would say yes.
Well, yes, of course,
But I love that, the QAnon thing, because...
And I am Q, by the way.
You're Q.
I'm Q. And if you don't know, then that's because you just don't know. That's the beauty of Q, right?
So, but yeah, we don't do that with white organizations like QAnon.
Right.
We could easily say that if we wanted to paint with the same broad brush with Black Lives Matter as we did with the Republican Party, we could say, hey,
Right.
Marjorie, whatever her name is,
Right.
represents the entire Republican Party and QAnon.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that's a great response there. So
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, the question becomes is, why do they feel compelled to say that?
to denigrate the cause.
Well, yeah, what I'm saying, why would African Americans feel compelled to say Black Lives Matter? Whether you agree with the statement or not, in regards to because you want to politicize it and so forth, once you get to the source of the matter, not the what, but the why. The what, one of our general authorities has said this: the what informs, but the why transforms. So, do a gut check and ask why. Why do they feel compelled to say this? Well, it's because there are issues that are clearly played out almost on a daily basis of African Americans facing police brutality, right, up to murder, and we know this, and we've seen this.
The response is, well, they shouldn't have got arrested.
Well, sure. I actually said the other day in an interview, someone was like, well, I was like, look, white people don't care if white people get killed by the police. We just don't care, right? The only time we care when someone gets killed by the police, if it's a black person and black people are complaining about it. That's the only time we ever bring it up. All of a sudden we have an issue. Because otherwise, if a white person gets killed by the police, well, clearly they deserved it. But what we're finding out is that's not really the case. People aren't actually deserving it half the time. And no one deserves that anyways, right? And what type of society are we that we say that people deserve to be murdered?
I look at Eric Garner.
Right.
What was his capital crime?
Right, selling cigarettes.
Yeah,
loose cigarettes.
I didn't know that was a capital crime.
Right,
personally.
That's grounds for murder. I mean, give me a break. I mean, if you actually believe in the second great commandment, right? Love thy neighbor as thyself, I think it is, or something like that. Whatever it is. Clearly I'm not a scriptorian, guys. But if you truly believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ, that we should love each other the way that, and treat each other the way we want to be treated, then that should be deplorable. There's no ambiguity in any of that. That you should mourn with those who mourn. I mean, it's to me, it's sad that we will run around as Latter-day Saints, white Latter-day Saints, and say, when someone says something about, well, aren't you guys racist? Like, oh, hold on now. I mean, more than half our church are people of color. And that shocks people. They're like, what? I'm like, actually, yeah, the majority of the members of the church are actually not white. We love saying that because it makes us look good. Doesn't mean we actually care about them, right? Not at all. Because the second one of our fellow Latter-day Saints says something, the fellow Latter-day Saint that's not white says something that goes again, that makes us question who we are as Christians and our fundamental beliefs, we've got issues. I did a post yesterday about Black Lives Matter, and a member in my ward, all lives matter, right? Period. And I'm like, yeah, I'm unfriending you because he does this all the time. Anyways, I'm like, I'm done. You're like 80 years old. I know exactly where you're coming from with this. I'm not going to try to convert you or anything, but it's like, why would you say that? I was actually, it was 4th of July. It was the Genesis choir. The Black Genesis group. It was their choir. They were singing at this 4th of July thing. It was like up in the American Fork Canyon with like the largest American flag ever to hang, that sort of thing. And I go there. Mind you, Genesis is a black choir, predominantly black choir. And I go there with a Black Lives Matter T-shirt. Yes, that was intentional. And this lady next to me goes, all lives matter. I said, well, I'm glad you agree that Black Lives Matter. That's not what I said. I said, well, you just said all lives matter. So if all lives matter, then you agree with Black Lives Matter, right? And she just got in a huff and walked away. I was like, just think what you're thinking about first. Try to think first of all, but think what you're saying. I mean, this goes like the heart of like immigration and so forth. When people are like, well, they shouldn't. It's like the argument would be like, well, we shouldn't be putting people in cages. Well, they shouldn't come here illegally. Well, no one has ever said they should come here illegally. I've never heard anyone say, Democrat, Republican, anywhere, go, it's okay for people to come here illegally. It's how we treat people when they get here. Are we going to be like the Soviet Union and China and these North Korea and stuff? Or are we going to be America? And if this is the greatest land on earth, why do we think it's only good enough for us? If we think it's so great, we want everyone to be here. God created people, not borders, right? But again, fundamentally, it's how we treat people when they're here. Our own citizens, our own brothers and sisters in the gospel. Right? This is why the church came out and said, this is horrible. But for some reason, we don't want to listen to the prophet as much as we want to listen to, politicians or our neighbor, whomever else, that is regurgitating sound bites that they've heard from somewhere else.
Well, it does seem like politics is our new religion. That we're getting a lot of pushback, especially among church members.
You're not going to get a lot of likes on this interview, by the way. Just saying.
Well, it depends. I have a broad audience. Some will love it, some will hate it, I'm sure.
That's all right.
As is the case with many of my interviews.
Right.
But do you get a lot of pushback in the ward then with your advocacy for Black Lives Matter and things like that?
Well, not during COVID. That's been nice. No, people are pretty much cowards. They're not going to say anything to me. That's just
it's easier not to be a coward on Facebook for some reason.
Right. Yeah. I remember I got a message, and it wasn't anyone in my ward. I know that, and so I hope it wasn't. But I've been. People have said, I have absolute hate for the white race, which is ironic. I've had someone say that someone should put a gun in my mouth to silence me.
Oh.
I get those sort of threats and things like that, because the guilty take the truth to be hard. Oh wait, that is scripture, isn't it? Wait, I do know scripture. I'm a convert to the church.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my mom struggled with the idea that because she believed that Mormons were racist. Well, yeah, okay. Not every Mormon. Well, guess what? So are Presbyterians, and so are Catholics, and so is everyone else.
So was she opposed to your joining the church because Mormons were racist?
She was worried.
Okay.
She wasn't going to tell me what to do, but just like her parents couldn't tell her what to do. But John Salter, who's in that famous photo, sitting next to my mom at the Jackson World War sit-in, he grew up in northern Arizona. He sent her a letter and said, Joan, that's my mom, Joan, nothing but good can come from this. I grew up with Mormons. They're good people. And from that is all the genealogy work that we've done since then, and whatnot. And it's really kind of opened a lot of doors and a lot of understanding for people and so forth. And my mom has, really been open about it at that point. Now it's funny because I was in Alabama at the Freedom Ride Museum in Birmingham, and I was passing through on my way to Mississippi from Georgia, and so I stopped there just kind of pop in, say hello, and I'm chatting with the person who runs the museum, and she knows who I am, right? Because my mom, right? I get that a lot, but.
There are probably a lot more black people who know who you are than white people.
Yeah. But so as we're there, a friend pulls up, a friend of hers pulls up, and she does tours and things like that, and we're all kind of sitting there talking. Hey, how's it going? And whatnot. I had no idea she was, and then she says, yeah. So where are you from? Now, normally when people say to me, "Where are you from?" I don't say Utah because I don't want to have that conversation. Right, and I can hide that because I'm white, right, and it's not like I'm Hispanic or something, and all of a sudden I can't hide the fact that anything, no one's going to ask me my religion, right? Polite company, you don't talk about those things, right? But so where are you from? I said, well, for some reason this time I said Utah, and she said, and you're wearing a Black Lives Matter T-shirt, right? That was a perception of Utah, right? Still is. And then the lady I was initially there with me says, "Don't you know who this is? This is Joan Trumpauer's son." Like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I'm like, no, I'm not offended, right? But I'll get asked that. Are you a Mormon? I'm like, yeah. Really? Actually, in our interview for An Ordinary Hero, Hank Thomas, who's there's a famous photo of a burning bus in Anniston, Alabama, from the Freedom Rides when they had bombed the bus on Mother's Day, right? And actually had closed let church out early so people could bring their children to watch the Freedom Riders burn alive on Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day! Let's watch people burn alive. This is the sick sort of stuff going on here in 1961. But we're interviewing Hank, and we flew him out here to do the interview, and he goes, "So, are you Mormon?" I'm like, "Oh man, I don't want to deflect this. How do I? I don't want to deal with this." I go, "Yeah, so's Daner." Now, Daner Gerald was one of our producers. He's an actor here and a filmmaker and stuff. But he was there with me, and I go, "Yeah, so's Daner. He's African American, by the way." He goes, "Wait, you're Mormon?" He goes, "Yeah, and so is Gladys Knight." He goes, "What?" He goes, "Man, I just assumed all Mormons were racist." He literally had called his wife that night. He told me the next day we were eating dinner and stuff. He was like, "Yeah, I had to call my wife. Said you ain't gonna believe what I just heard. Gladys Knight's a Mormon."
Yeah.
Says that changes everything. He was just like he said, "I have to go home and tell people," right? Now again, that doesn't mean that we've arrived and so forth. But as people have a greater understanding of who we are and what we represent and so forth, and that we're more than just a caricature to people, when they start interacting, you start to understand. And that's why I think that's one of our bigger problems, particularly here in Utah, is that we don't have that interaction. I mean, our wards are lily white. Our schools are lily white, right? In a majority of these places. So we don't have that meaningful interaction that really needs to take place amongst different people, right? Be it LGBTQ or Hispanic or Black or whatever, right? And when you have those meaningful interactions, you can no longer just blatantly throw aside something like Black Lives Matter or immigration issues, because you understand, you feel for people. It's called empathy, and that's more than anything, I think the Savior was the great empathizer, right? He could understand what everyone went through. Right? He believes Black Lives Matter. So should we. And he proved it because his prophets have said it.
Interesting. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Emmy-award winning director Loki Mulholland. In our next conversation, we'll talk about the important question: did Loki's family own slaves in the past? Right?
Yeah, we owned people. Yeah. We actually helped start the whole thing, quite frankly. We arrived in Jamestown in 1610. We started, we were one of the original planter elites. We served in the House of Burgesses. We were there. So, we also were one of the original signers of the Declaration of Independence, right? So, we're real Americans. When people try to sit there and I say that kind of facetiously, but the fact of the matter is, I get people who try to argue that I'm not a real American because blah blah blah. I'm like, hey, wait, hold on 1 second now. We fought in every war, right? We did all of it. We did everything, right? We were there for all of it.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, sign up at patreon.com/gospeltangents, and for $5 a month, you can hear the entire interview without any interruptions. If you'd like to see the whole video, that's just $8 a month, and you can sign up either at youtube.com/gospeltangents or on our website at gospeltangents.com and click the yellow subscribe button, or you can go to patreon.com/gospeltangents, and I'll just need to make sure that we're Facebook friends, and I'll add you to our insiders group, and you can see the entire interview uncut. If you'd like to get PDF transcripts of our interviews, those are just $10 a month. And for just $15 a month, I will send you paperback versions of our transcripts as soon as they come out. Or, of course, you can buy them on Amazon as well. Go to Amazon.com and do a search for Gospel Tangents Interview, and you can see all of our transcripts there. Don't forget to sign up for our updates at facebook.com/gospeltangents. Of course, you can follow us at Gospel Tangents on Twitter. To hear our interviews updated to your podcast player, go to tinyurl.com/gospeltangents and make sure you give us a 5-star review. And of course, you should show your support for Gospel Tangents with one of these cool t-shirts like this green one, or light blue, sport gray, royal blue, purple, of course black, beautiful gold, and of course Utah red. I probably left out some colors, but if you want to see more, go to gospeltangents.com/shop and you can get one of these. So once again, thanks for listening. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some more of our great videos. Thanks again.